Hello, I'm Larry J. Ford, Vice Chairman of the Clay County Republican Party, and we'd like to welcome today Mr. Madison Cawthorn, who is the GOP congressional candidate, one of the GOP congressional candidates for the 11th Congressional District of North Carolina. Also want to welcome Mr. Tim Radford, who is the principal owner and general manager of WKRK Radio in Murphy, and we appreciate his facilitating this session this afternoon. We're here today for a conversation with Mr. Cawthorn about his candidacy. Good afternoon, Madison, and thank you for joining us.
Larry, Tim, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm excited to showcase what I believe in to the voters of Western North Carolina.
Very good. Tell us about yourself and your background.
Well, you know what? I was raised right here in Western North Carolina. I'm from Henderson County. I was raised in these mountains and educated here. And I really am wanting to run for Congress right now because I'm sure everyone here can remember in 2016 when we took the House, we took the Senate, and we had the presidency. I'm sure that all of us just expected these ginormous sweeping changes to come across our country of just constitutional conservatism coming back and just roaring back to life. But I'm sure, like myself and like many others, we were all disappointed, especially in Congress. You know, we had President Donald Trump, who was really seeming like he was having to just drag along Congress to come along. It was like he had this 50-pound backpack strapped to him while he was trying to navigate the obstacle course of the swamp. And I was just so disappointed. And these career politicians who, anytime we said, hey, why is our spending so high? Why is the government growing so large? And they would always just cry, oh, it's because of the Democrats. But when we had an opportunity to amend all of that, I believe that just all these career politicians we've been sending to Washington, D.C., were looking out for their own self-interest as per usual. And I believe it's a time for a new breed of conservatives, people who I believe how Donald Trump has done for all of us, thankfully, is he's really taken the collar off of so many young conservatives who are coming up through the ranks. And we realize that this is not a time for genteel politics. This is time to be a pit bull, to be a street fighter, and to really attack this liberal ideology that's destroying our country. And so, like I said, my name is Madison Cawthorn. I really want to represent the people of Western North Carolina because I believe in representative government. I believe that my persuasiveness, my charisma, my ability to carry a message, and my truly held core beliefs are very important. I mean, as I'm sure all of you can see, there's nowhere around here is a piece of paper. I'm not going to be reciting anything off a piece of paper for this or relying on cue cards. I am going to be relying on careful study. I'm going to be relying on my heartfelt desires and what I truly believe in. All of those things inform my decisions. And so I want you all to know who I truly am at my base.
Well, I hope you forgive me for using a list of questions that I do have here, Madison. So after looking at your paperless desk, but aside from those general principles that you just listed, is there any one specific reason that you're running for Congress that is a core belief of yours?
Absolutely. One is that I believe in the Republican Party. I believe the Republican Party is the best hope for our country to move forward, to be prosperous, and to continue this tradition of freedom we've had for the past 2 centuries. When I found out that the redistricting happened inside of our district, which had added in 39,000 new registered Democrats in urban Buncombe County, I didn't shudder in fear. I knew that Congressman Mark Meadows was going to hold the line. He was going to make sure that this place wouldn't fall. He was very respected here in our district. But when I found out that he wasn't running, I was very nervous and I was very afraid for our district because, the Democrats aren't putting up weak candidates. They were running people who they thought would take on Congressman Mark Meadows. And so at this point where we're at in our district, we have to realize that 44%, the largest voting base in this all of Western North Carolina, is unaffiliated voters. So I believe that, yes, we have to send someone, nominate a GOP nominee who is going to represent our strong conservative values and truly believe in those so that we can rally our base. We can get that 35% of registered Republicans to come vote for us. But we also have to send someone who is going to be able to reach those undecided voters, to persuade them over onto our side of the fence, because if not, we're going to lose this seat and it will flip blue.
Very good. What specific abilities, education, qualifications, experience that you have do you think will allow you to serve the people of Western North Carolina if elected to Congress?
Well, you know what? I'm sure that my opponent will tout her business experience. I can tout my business experience as well. And so can thousands of other people here in Western North Carolina. You know, we all know there's very, very many people who know what it's like to set a budget for a company, to try and make it profitable, to move forward and advance that company. And, you know, unfortunately, I don't have the benefit of being on this earth for as long as my opponent has been. And so while my business experience has not been for as many years, I don't think that it's the years that you spent on earth that define who you are, but rather I believe it's the what you do with the years that you've been given. And in my life, I've had to overcome extreme obstacles. I've had to overcome extreme adversity. I know what it's like to face adversity. I know what it's like to feel disenfranchised, to see all my dreams taken away. And I know what it's like to fight. And I believe that that's something that so many people in our country are going through right now, especially here in Western North Carolina. You can think in Graham County and Clay County, both of those areas are some of the highest unemployment in the entire state of North Carolina. And so I'm sure many people watching this understand what it's like, especially during this time of COVID-19, where the economy has been so just disrupted, are understanding what it's like to go through hard times. And as I said before, I don't think we need someone who can just go and rest on their laurels and say, well, this is my experience, and I believe that, you know, we've sent these kind of people to Washington and it's always worked, and so that's what we're always going to do. No, I believe that we are at a Dunkirk moment in our country. You know, it's that awesome story from the, you know, towards the beginning of the World War, when the British ground military was all surrounded by the Germans in Europe. And they realized that they were going to be left defenseless if they didn't save them. And so the people band together at the behest of Winston Churchill, and they all put a boat in the water to go and save their country. And so I believe that this is time for myself and for many people to put a boat in the water. Let's go over, let's do something unconventional, and let's send someone who can persuade this young voter bloc of Western North Carolina, the 40 and under, who seems to have fallen for the deceit of socialism, which is morally and financially bankrupt. And so I believe we need to send a fighter who's going to try and take our country back.
If you were elected to Congress, what would be the first piece of legislation that you would introduce?
The first piece of legislation I would introduce, it's a toss-up between one of two. I really believe that we need to get some kind of healthcare reform led by the Republicans. For too often, I feel like we've been the party of no when it comes to healthcare reform, without truly offering any viable plan that makes it more easier for people to move forward. You know, I was speaking to a young voter who said that she was having to decide if she was going to pay her mortgage or if she was going to take her child to the hospital because it was her child was sick. And that's a terrible thing. And, you know, I can desperately relate to that, because when I was 18 years old and came out of the hospital after my car accident, after my settlements with the insurance company, I still had over $3 million in medical debt. And that's crushing for anybody to go through, especially an 18-year-old. And so I understand the crushing weight that can put on people. And so I truly believe we need to introduce some kind of legislation which removes a lot of the regulations, like I do think we need to do with almost every industry, from the healthcare industry, and allow more competition into the market. You know, we see that Blue Cross and Blue Shield has a virtual monopoly on the state of North Carolina, and I think that creates artificially high prices. And the second piece of legislation, when I can't decide which one I'd like to introduce first, would be a bill for infrastructure. You know, especially we should have the best roads, the best bridges, the best schools and hospitals in our district and the entire country, make it the envy of the world. But I also believe that we have got to go deeper than that. You know, I'm sure all of you can relate to this, especially you, Tim, working in that industry out in the far western counties. You all know what it's like to have limited access to broadband capabilities, to have limited access to cell service. And so I think we need to offer some tax incentives to companies like Verizon or AT&T to make sure that we get some fiber optic cables out there that are accessible for everyone to get to, and that we also make sure that we have cell towers that are put out there so people can just be a part of this modern economy that we're going into.
Okay, let's move to something more specific, and something that has been in the news definitely over the past 3 years, something of concern to a lot of folks here in Western North Carolina, and especially those on the conservative side, and that would be immigration. Do you favor building the wall that President Trump supports?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think that we have had a messaging problem when it comes to the American people. You know, so many people in the American public, you know, led by these crazy far leftists who are just trying to deceive them, are acting like our desires to have a border wall on our southern border are based in xenophobia, are based in this hatred for immigrants. But I mean, you know, we know that we're a country that was built by immigrants. I think that immigration, legal immigration, makes us a more dynamic and a more productive economy, because, you know, we especially if we move to a skilled-based immigration policy where we allow people to come in based on merit and based on what our country needs. And so I think very few Republicans hate immigration. What we do hate is we hate major national security problems. We have these ginormous entities on our southern border in the form of cartels who do billions of dollars of revenue every single year, who just showed last October that they can defeat the Mexican military anytime they want in a town that was very close to our southern border, and who can effectively get any tens of thousands of people across our southern border whenever they choose. And so what really makes me shudder and makes me afraid is that who's to say that this isn't, they're not going to send over 10, 20, 100 bad actors. I mean, how many people did it take to take down the Twin Towers at the beginning of the 2000s? I really believe that we've got to build this border wall so that we can be in control of our borders, so that we can have a sense of security. Border security is non-negotiable.
Aside from the wall, what other border security measures would you support?
I would support definitely having a very high-tech surveillance system. That's something that allows the Border Patrol agents, and also to bolster our Border Patrol agents' numbers, but that's something that allows our Border Patrol agents to identify threats quickly and be able to respond to them in an effective means. I'm not against using drones over our southern and northern, all of our borders, to just keep an eye on things that are going on and make sure that that our country is safe.
According to the Heritage Foundation, there are at least 11.5 million illegal immigrants in the U.S. at the present time. Would you vote for an immigration reform package that includes so-called amnesty for the illegal immigrants?
You know, that's a tough question, because I believe that it would be unfair to the millions of people who are patiently waiting in line and trying to do this legally. Who knows if there needs to be some kind of sunsetting clause put in there that, you know, if you go into this 10-year process, you show that you're a productive citizen, you show that you're able to pay your taxes, you show that you're able to abide by the law, then perhaps maybe you can work on getting you into the system. But I don't believe that we should have a pathway to citizenship, because that's put out that is quick and fast acting before we allow all these people who have been patiently waiting in line, who have been following the law, to become citizens first.
Well, I don't know if you guys remember it, but I remember in 1986, there was an amnesty package that was passed when Reagan was president, and apparently that did not cure the problem. But one last question on immigration. In light of the current COVID-19 crisis, do you think there should be required health screening for all persons entering the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. I believe if we can't produce a valid background check, if we can't produce a valid health screening, if we can't know that this person is going to be beneficial to our society, create this symbiotic relationship between immigrant and new host country, then I believe that's ridiculous. We're not here to be the caretakers of the rest of the world. We are here to take care of the American citizens first. And so I'm not going to start just allowing people who may be sick, not to allowing people who maybe have bad intentions coming into our country. Especially when we have veterans who are living on the sides of streets right now, people who deserve the thanks of a grateful nation, who are out of a job. I think we need to take care of American citizens first before we start allowing people to come in. And when we do start allowing people to come in, we need to make sure that they are going to be a beneficial part of society and not put people in danger.
Okay, let's talk about the topic of the day, which is COVID-19. And as everyone knows, that crisis has resulted in severe damage to the U.S. economy. We've got 30 million people unemployed right now, and we've got many businesses that have been shut down. Mostly small businesses seem to be shut down. What should Congress do if you're elected? What should Congress do to get people back to work and get the economy back on a sound footing?
Number one is reopen the economy. Lord willing, our economy will already be opened well before I get to be sworn I get to take my oaths and become a member of Congress. But if it's not, we have got to reopen our economy. I believe the liberals are doing us a disservice, and the mainstream media and Hollywood are doing us a disservice by painting this false binary choice. They're saying we either have to care about these capitalistic reptilians who care about jobs more than we care about lives. And I believe that there's a way that we can do both. We can protect the most vulnerable in our society, American citizens, while also having a structured reopening of our economy. It's far past time that we allow people to start going out and, just enjoying our economy as a whole. I know we just moved into phase 2 on Friday at 5 p.m. in our state, but I believe that this should be moving much more rapidly. It's no surprise that this is politically motivated by Governor Cooper here in North Carolina, because we have the GOP convention, which is going to be happening in North Carolina, in Charlotte. And so I'm sure that he's trying to ruin that as much as he can. I believe that we have got to, what I believe we need. And, I have several friends who have small businesses, people who are just now starting to get into the black, people who are just been putting their whole lives devoted into these businesses. And I don't want a stimulus check. I don't want my friends to get stimulus checks. I don't want I do not want stimulus checks. What I don't want is I do not want for my friends' businesses to close. And so I believe we need to get our economy reopened so that people can start going back to work, so that our economy can start thriving again. The one silver lining about this entire economic crisis that we're facing is that we have had no actual structural damage to anything physically. We could just, if we drop the government mandates, we could all go back to living a roaring economy again tomorrow. I'm very afraid for what the Q2 earnings reports are going to be for, the NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, because I believe that we haven't seen a major drop inside of our stock market precisely because we had such a strong January. We were at the height of the greatest economy the world has ever seen. And so the profits were still even high, even though we were shut down for the latter half of the first quarter. And so I believe we all need to prepare for the coming economic storm when all these profits are so far down for so many companies.
Well, I'm looking forward to phase 2, so at least I can get a haircut. What little hair I've got left is getting kind of shaggy, so I do have an appointment with the young lady that cuts my hair at on Tuesday, which is the quickest I could get in. But
I'm just excited to get to go eat at a restaurant again and see some people around.
Speaking, you mentioned just a moment ago, and that foreshadowed my next question. Do you believe that the shutdown orders imposed by the governors of various states, such as North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, went too far, not far enough, or were fairly balanced between health and safety and essential economic needs?
Went too far. Absolutely went too far. This is reminiscent of when we first invaded the Middle East after 9/11. President George Bush had information that there was a weapon of mass destruction or a nuclear weapon in the Middle East. And so he knew that he had to go in to help protect American lives. And when we had the information that what they were estimating on the low end was that 2 million Americans were going to be dead from this virus by this summer, none of my friends had a problem shutting the doors of their business. They said, if it takes 2 weeks to get our ventilator capacity, to get our PPE capacity, and to get our ICU bed capacity in our hospitals up to par so we can attack this virus head on, they were more than happy to do that. Americans love one another. We're sensible people. If we knew that this threat was coming, we were more than happy to prepare for it. But at the end of those 2 weeks, when especially here in Western North Carolina, when a very, very few of us actually knew someone who had gotten a symptomatic version of COVID-19, and none of us started seeing, dead bodies lining the streets, we said, I think that this was overblown. I think the mainstream media sensationalized what was happening. And because of that, we just destroyed our economy for no reason. So we wanted to reopen right away. But then all of these states, they just started, especially these Democratic controlled states, started just slowing our momentum so much because they want to destroy the Trump economy. I mean, if you look at Governor DeSantis down in Florida, he was one of the first, and the governor down in Georgia, they were the two first to open up their states. And as also with Governor Abbott, a fellow politician in a wheelchair out in Texas, they led the entire country in reopening. And we see that they have the lowest cases of COVID-19. They have the lowest cases of deaths. Whereas in places like New York and here in North Carolina, we're just taking a beating because our governors are misleading us. And so I think that we've gone too far. The government's overreach is ridiculous, especially shutting churches down, which are our First Amendment right. We have got to we can't give up our liberty so easily.
Well, speaking of rights, in some states, certain aspects of these shutdown orders have been protested as being in violation of certain constitutional rights. Do you believe that North Carolina's shutdown orders violated any constitutional rights? And if so, which ones?
Yes, the First Amendment, the shutting, that we're not supposed to be able to impose laws or any on places of worship. That's just absolutely ridiculous, and it's un-American. And it's religious freedoms is the reason why there was such a large mass immigration to the Americas in the first place before we were even a country. And so I believe that religious freedom is the bedrock of our nation. It's our First Amendment for a reason. And to be able to just throw that out because we're all afraid, that really scares me. I'm sure many of you have read the Screw Tape Letters by, and in the story where Satan is walking with one of his demons, he's showing him this table of tools. He's saying, "Oh, this is self-pity. You can use that to destroy a Christian," or showing him these different tools that the enemy can use. I believe, unfortunately, we have shown very similar to that. We have shown the Democrats what a functional and effective tool fear is. And so I believe that we need to start electing people who are going to be able to hold the line of our values and of our Constitution, of our Bill of Rights. Because now that the Democrats know what all you can accomplish by fear, it will not surprise me if we have another pandemic or a nuclear fallout scare or something just to get people to fall in line of their liberal wish list.
Well, do you think that if elected to Congress, that you would introduce legislation that might prevent such overreaching orders being imposed in the future?
Absolutely. First of all, I believe it's sad that we even need to introduce any legislation for that, because the fact that churches were able to be shut down is supposedly protected under our Constitution, under our First Amendment. And so the fact that we were having to do things, the fact that, up in Virginia, we had to have a rally to try and get them to not be able to infringe upon our Second Amendment rights. It's all very disheartening. I think we're living under a tyranny of the judicial system right now. So many judges are so far left leaning that we're not, really challenging, especially in the Ninth Circuit. We're not really challenging these overreaching orders that that governments are imposing, especially state governors. And so I believe that, one, we need to get rid of all these liberal judges and put constitutional conservatives on the bench. And two, they need to start holding these governors and these state houses in line so that they don't start overreaching our constitutional rights. But to answer your question more directly, I believe that the best way we could do that is to say that if you don't abide by federal laws, you don't abide by the laws of our land and the rights that are enshrined in our founding documents, then you will not get federal funding.
Well, I do note that there have been a couple of lawsuits that I'm aware of, probably some more. One originating out of North Carolina, which a sitting federal district court judge, indicated that a church had brought this lawsuit and got a ruling in their favor that the governor's order had infringed upon their First Amendment rights of religion. So that was one victory.
I'm sure you saw, like I did, President Donald Trump, giving a briefing where he stated, and I think will go down in history as a great quote of our president, one of the many, that churches and places of worship are essential.
Right. Okay. I know that Madison, you and Tim are probably not too concerned about this, but many residents of Western North Carolina are retirees. So we need to talk about Social Security, Medicare just a little bit. Some financial experts indicate that in the not too distant future, the Social Security Trust Fund will be exhausted and it will be unable to pay obligations to Social Security recipients at the current rate. Do you agree? And if so, what will you do if elected to Congress once you're there?
I will tell you, I believe that when we call the Social Security a trust fund, I think that's a disservice. This has been nothing more than a Ponzi scheme that the federal government has just been allowing us to pay this extra money, what we thought was into a savings account practically for our own retirement, so that they can just fund all kinds of other things. And, I believe, I don't remember which Congress was the one that passed legislation that allowed them to use that funding for other means. But I believe that we need to put this back into a blind trust to where the government cannot get their greedy hands on it. And so that we can fund this American dream, which we've proposed to people. Something that I think is very interesting is so often people say, oh, well, we need to cut our entitlements. We need to do X, Y, and Z. And while I agree, we need to work towards a balanced budget. And I believe the best way to do that is to slowly wean the American people, those 2 or 3% a year off of our entitlement programs. When they call Social Security an entitlement program, I think that's laughable. that is something that the American people have paid into. That is their right to receive. And it's the American people should not be punished because they have a government which has been overzealous and over greedy and not had really sound financial guidance. And they really just ran a Ponzi scheme.
If you were elected to Congress, there's another issue that I'd like to ask you about. By law, which was enacted by Congress, Social Security recipients get an annual cost of living adjustment, sometimes referred to as the COLA, to help offset the effect of inflation on Social Security benefits. In 2019, the increase was 1.6%. You think the current COLA formula results in annual increases in Social Security benefits that are too much, too little, or just about right?
I believe they're just about right. You know, I would think we really need to fight against inflation in whatever form that it comes in. I think that just weakens the American dollar and weakens our ability to fight on the world stage. And so I think that if we start, offering lower interest rates and trying to keep inflation down to a bare minimum, which is going to be very hard after all the money that we've printed for the COVID-19 crisis, we may need to adjust it to adjust for that kind of inflation. But I believe that what our priority should be is not fixing what COLA does, the formula that works off of, but fixing the rate of inflation as a whole, so that we can all remain net neutral on the incomes that we're getting.
The Senior Citizens League states that over the past decade, Medicare Part B premiums rose 154%. What should Congress do to restrain out-of-pocket Medicare costs for senior citizens, and what legislation would you support to help keep Medicare affordable for senior citizens?
Well, you know what? I believe making Medicare affordable for senior citizens is the exact same as making Medicare for all Americans. That's what we touched on very early in this interview, was especially the fact that when we have what's going on in our country is these artificially high rates of healthcare costs because of a protected market, it's causing a major strain on people. I am on North Rugby Road here in Henderson County. If I wanted to order a pizza right now, there are 6 different pizza companies who deliver to this house. And, I'm using this as an analogy, but because all of them would know that they deliver to my house, they all know that they are competing for my dollars. So it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that they are all going to try and get me the best tasting pizza with the best service at the fastest rate for the lowest amount of cost, because they know that's the pizza I will choose. I think that's exactly, I know that's a very simplistic way to describe it, but I think it's exactly what we need in our healthcare system. Whether you look at the VA or whether you look at Medicare recipients, we should enable them to be able to go outside of the system that they're in, so that they can go to different healthcare providers, and we should allow them to have more options so that the free market does its work and lowers the costs of healthcare.
All right, thank you. Moving to another very important topic, the U.S. Constitution is the foundation of our government, and all elected officials take an oath to support and defend it. Specifically, do you support the Second Amendment, which says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? And I think I've heard you say earlier that you do support the Second Amendment, so I'll just go to the second part of this question, is that over the last 80 years, Congress has passed several federal laws which do regulate firearms. What would you do about those? Would you vote to either repeal or to strengthen those laws?
I'll tell you, I've got my Glock on me at all times, ready to defend myself and my constitutional rights. But what I believe is so important is that the First Amendment protects and defends all of the other amendments and all the other freedoms that are allocated to us in our founding documents. And so I believe that if we allow the Second Amendment to fall, and I don't think that it'll ever happen overnight. I think that it's a gradual decline in our Second Amendment rights, like we're seeing with things like the NFA, the NFA, and just all of the different infringements that we've had on our firearms. You can't even buy a silencer now for the Hearing Protection Act, which was killed. You can't have an automatic rifle, even though it's proven that automatic rifles are very similarly just as deadly as a semi-automatic rifle. I think that if we allow the Second Amendment to fall, our First Amendment will fall, and then we'll lose all of our freedoms in this country. I oftentimes use the allegory that if the government is trying to take away our firearms, that means that they're probably about to do something that we would normally shoot them in the face for. And so I believe that the Second Amendment is there not for hunting purposes, not to have a sporting rifle, but that if a tyrant ever rises up and begins to cause tyranny in our country, we have the right and the ability to defend ourselves. So I would repeal many laws that are on the books. I would especially repeal the law that forces you to pay ridiculously high premiums to just get a silencer on your gun, a gun which enables you to have your firearm be more quiet, which causes less disturbance to neighborhoods and causes much less disturbance to hunters and firearm shooters and people who are proficient with firearms. It would protect their hearing. And so I know the Hearing Protection Act, which was pushed very heavily by Science Co., was killed in committee, but that's something that I would like to reinvigorate in our country so that we can just start scaling back all the infringements we've had on our Second Amendment rights.
Well, I see that you're apparently a concealed weapon carrier, so this next question ought to be fairly pertinent. A statute, as you know, a substantial number of citizens across the U.S. are also concealed weapon carriers, and they have licenses from their various licenses or permits from their state of residence as a concealed weapons carrier. Do you support legislation that would make this universal, that there would be universal reciprocity for concealed carry weapon licenses across all 50 states?
Yes, it's something that I would like to introduce, and I believe the idea has been floated around before, but it's something that I would call constitutional carry. There is no law that should mandate that an American cannot carry his firearm on his or her person. I believe that gun rights are women's rights. It's as it said, God created all men, but Smith and Wesson made them equal. I believe that a firearm, especially for someone in my position who has a disability, or for someone who is a woman and might not be able to defend herself against the force of a very strong man, I believe that having a firearm is something that protects us and something that makes sure that oftentimes it's said an armed society is a polite society. And so I believe that if we were allowed to carry our firearms as the Constitution meant it, then we would not have all of these instances of where these cowardly yellow bellies are going into these gun-free zones and just shooting up civilians. I tell you, almost every single mass shooting that I've seen, the people that do it, the people that carry out these acts, one, they were probably raised in fatherless homes, so that's where the main problem comes from. And two, they are cowards. They would never show up and try to commit this awful atrocity and this awful evil if they knew that the people they were going to hurt were also armed.
Well, speaking, you mentioned the old saying that God made all men, God created all men. The version I heard was that God created all men, but Samuel Colt made them equal. So, anyway, shifting gears just a little bit, but still staying with constitutional issues. Do federal agencies like the EPA or the Education Department have too much power? And do the regulations that they enact and enforce infringe upon the constitutional duty and right of Congress to pass legislation or the rights of the citizens?
This is an excellent question, one I sincerely appreciate. One, I think this talks to the problem of our problem with national debt, because I'm sure, as you know, if you take you randomly select any three letters in the alphabet and you throw them together, you have the initials for most likely for some major government agency, which sucks up so much money and enacts so many unconstitutional laws, which only Congress is supposed to be able to carry out. I think we've got to really limit and scale back the abilities that these people have. I mean, you think the EPA, the SEC, the FCC, all of these different agencies which are infringing upon our rights. I mean, as I'm sure you know, out in Clay County, Graham County, and Cherokee, you cannot receive a signal from a North Carolina-based news agency because the FCC prohibits it. That doesn't make any sense. They have to get their news from places like Tennessee, Virginia, or Georgia. It just does not make a whole lot of sense. And so there's a lot of these laws which are on the books today and regulations which are enacted by these three-letter agencies that I think have got to be removed from the books. And I think we need to really scale back the power and the scope that these agencies have. One, because I believe it would help with our federal budget, and two, because it's the right thing to do. Right quickly, just since we're talking about constitutional issues, in my mind, I'm sure that you've like I have read the Social Contract written by John Locke, a philosopher, which is something that I believe really enabled the founding fathers to have such a wonderful form of government that they created for us. In that, when they were talking about is the fact that the real purpose of government is really just to protect its citizens. The government is only able to govern with the consent of the governed. And so the things that I think the federal government should be allowed to do are what is enumerated that they're allowed to do. I believe there's 18 things that the Constitution allows the federal government to do. And basically that comes down to make sure that our citizens do not get shot at by some foreign power, and two, make sure that we're able to make a ridiculous amount of money because we negotiate the best trade deals we possibly can with foreign powers. And I think that's really the only role of the federal government. I think, and I'll say something that's a little bombastic and may sound a little outrageous at first, but I'll explain it. I think, take for example, the federal system of education, the federal Department of Education. I believe that needs to be abolished. I believe that we need to send that power back to the states, send it back to local governments, so that, because no bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. needs to be making the decisions of what our children are being taught in these public schools. Our education system in America has become nothing more than than indoctrination camps. And I believe if we give the power back to the states, we can hold the government more in check.
Well, speaking of the theory that Locke espoused, which you just mentioned, apparently Thomas Jefferson must have studied him as well, because he famously said the best government is that which governs least, which is pretty much the philosophy I adhere to. But you've already answered my next question, which was, if you could eliminate one federal agency, which one would it be? Which we now know is the Education Department. So with that, we'll switch over to another topic that a lot of folks in the 11th District are very concerned with. And traditionally, as you probably know, the constituent services that a member of Congress provides to the citizens of the district, that's one of the most important functions of that congressional office. And it may be the greatest impact that a member of Congress has on the average citizen. If a citizen has an issue or problem with their Social Security, with the VA, with their Medicare, or with some other federal agency, such as a business, then oftentimes the most expedient and the best help that those citizens can get is through the congressional office. Now, in the past, both Congressman Charles Taylor and Heath Shuler had a constituent services office with a staff member located in one of our 4 southwestern counties, either Cherokee, Clay, Graham, or Macon. Now, Congressman Meadows did not, which from a lot of folks I've talked to, frankly, was a disappointment to a lot of folks in this area. One of the few that they had with Congressman Meadows, I might add, as his westernmost office was in Waynesville. And now that's an hour-and-a-half drive from Hayesville, probably closer to 2-hour drive from Murphy or Robbinsville. So the question is, if you were elected, would you commit to having a constituent services office and staff member in one of these 4 southwestern counties, so that residents of Clay, Cherokee, Graham, or Macon won't have to drive almost to Asheville to get help?
I absolutely will commit to that. We are a representative government. And so the number one thing that we're supposed to do is to be able to represent the people that elected us. And so I think that we've got to be able to have easy access for our constituents to be able to contact us, to be able to get help. In this entire election, whether we're talking about on the Democratic side with Mo Davis or on my opponent here on the GOP side, I am the only candidate who has actually worked inside of been a staffer in a congressional office. I understand the ins and outs of what district offices needs. I understand what constituent services we need. Whether it ranges from a whole host of things, whether we're talking about some help that you need with the VA, whether it's a military academy appointment for a high school student, or whether it is just something as simple as expediting the process for someone to get their passport so they can go on vacation with their family that they had planned. And, they just happen to forget that their passport was expired. I believe that constituent services are the most important thing that a congressman can do, because that's truly what they were elected to do, is to go be the voice of these people in Washington, D.C. to the federal government. And so I do not think there are my 2 goals. One that I already touched on is that we have the greatest infrastructure in the country, and that the infrastructure of our country as a whole becomes the envy of the world once more. But 2 is that in Western North Carolina, I would like for the entire country to know that we have, bar none, the most efficient and the best constituent services there are in all of Congress. After the census is conducted in 2020, I'm sure that we'll probably have a little over 500 members of Congress instead of the roughly 400 or so that we have now. And so I believe that it's not too much to ask that the 11th district, that we are the #1 out of all 500 to have the best constituent services there are.
Well, it's interesting that you've worked on a congressional staff, so surely you've thought about how you would staff that office if elected. Do you have any ideas in mind as who your chief of staff might be?
I do indeed. I do intend to probably make my chief of staff a female and someone from Western North Carolina, born and raised here, so that his or her loyalties and their entire purpose for being in Washington is represent the home that they love. And 2, I'd like to make my district director someone who's from Western North Carolina as well. I don't think we should be having all these transplants coming in, filling our services, because at the end of the day, they don't really represent Western North Carolina. They're just trying to pull levers of power.
Well, it's good to hear that you do have some a definite commitment to constituent services, because that's, for a lot of folks, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where they interact with government, with the services that a congressional office can provide. Other than what we've discussed, do you have any other ideas for improving constituent services that have not been implemented in the past by other members of Congress for the 11th district?
You know what? I'll tell you, the first time I ever went to Washington, D.C., I was on the shoulders of Congressman Charles Taylor. That was the first campaign I ever worked on when I was very young. And, I got to do his famous bus tour where you take all his volunteers up to Washington, D.C. And that's something that we didn't have in Congressman Heath Shuler or Congressman Mark Meadows. Heath Shuler was a good Blue Dog Democrat, and Mark Meadows has been an incredible representative for us. But I believe Congressman Charles Taylor is probably the congressman in my lifetime, especially, who has done the absolute most for the people of Western North Carolina. I mean, you can see brick and mortar changes that he made to the people to Western North Carolina, especially any veterans who've been to the VA. They know that this is the best VA in the country, and that's in part and mainly because of Congressman Charles Taylor. And so, while I want my constituent services to be second to none, I also want to make a lasting change, like true infrastructure changes, something that people can really tangibly feel that their representative went to Washington and made a difference. As President Trump always says in his campaign, promises made, promises kept. That's something that I want to do, whether it's inviting the tax incentives to have Verizon Wireless or AT&T or some mobile provider get more cell towers out in our western counties, the southwestern counties, like you mentioned, or whether it's improving all our bridges, think of Corridor K in between, Andrews and Toccoa. That was passed in the 60s to be made a four-lane highway, yet we still haven't seen any improvements to it. Or you look at Highway 64. There's so many different areas where we need to make improvements to our Western North Carolina area to strengthen our economy, because a strong infrastructure system creates a strong economy, which creates a strong Western North Carolina, which means that we're doing our part to make sure that we are the greatest country on the planet for the rest of time.
Well, I certainly agree with your admiration and respect for former Congressman Charles Taylor, and I've been privileged to know him since he was a state senator, long before he ever got to Congress. But he certainly has served the citizens of Western North Carolina throughout the years. Well, in closing, what else would you like the voters for this GOP primary that's coming up in early June? What else would you like for them to know about you that we haven't covered so far?
I think a question that oftentimes comes up is, I don't really want to focus on the fall election that's coming up against our Democratic contender, who's going to be a very strong Democratic contender. Mm-hmm. I'm not focused on that, especially for the purposes of this interview. One, I would like to talk about this runoff election that we have coming up. Oftentimes people ask me, hey, is there any daylight or is there any differences in your stances versus your opponents? And to quickly answer that, we agree on just about every issue. I believe that she's a true conservative. This never Trumper nonsense that was going around. I listened to the whole tape. It's very clear that it was she was being facetious. And so, I'm not wanting to get into a character assassination campaign, just trying to throw mud. But what I do want to do is draw a difference between what can actually happen. While my opponent is busy posting videos onto her social media of her gardening on a tractor or shooting a gun for what appears to be the first time, I'm busy releasing in-depth policy papers. I'm busy telling the people of Western North Carolina and this new town square of social media, the things that I believe in. And, I'm tackling tough topics like abortion, like our economy, like our infrastructure. I'm wanting to discuss to the people and be as accessible to the people of Western North Carolina as I can be, because this election is nothing more than an extended job interview with the people of Western North Carolina. And as I've said before, no matter how hard the question is, no matter how much pressure there is, I will always show up. There have been forum after forum and invitation by the North Carolina 11th District and by the North Carolina GOP itself for my opponent to meet me in a one-on-one forum debate. And she declines every single time. And it's not surprising. Public speaking is definitely my strong suit. But, she knows that I'm not going to attack her on her character or what she, believes in personally, like she's done with me. I'm going to go into there very prepared for an in-depth policy discussion. And I believe that the reason she's always declined is because she cannot debate or she cannot stand up in a forum, because if she does not have prepared statements that are written by somebody else clearly, because she doesn't have them memorized, then she's unable to be able to represent her conservative values. And so you're telling me that this opponent is going to go up against an Air Force JAG prosecutor who prosecuted terrorists in Guantanamo Bay and be able to articulately defend the causes of conservatism? It would be an embarrassment to our party, and it would be a shortcoming of the conservative doctrine that we're all pushing for. And, when we're going up to Washington, D.C., I plan to represent the people up in for Western North Carolina there. The pressure we are going to face, the minds we're going to go up against, while the liberal ideology is asinine and foolhardy, the people who are supporting it are not dumb. I'm sure that they're supporting this because they may think it's the best for America, or they want to fundamentally change America like President Obama stated. But what I want to do is be able to defeat this liberal ideology, because it will cause us to be both morally and financially bankrupt as a nation. And we need to reach this new generation, or else we're going to have a generational time bomb that will go off in the Republican Party, where we will be in the minority for the rest of time. And we will quickly watch our rights be evaporated and abate over time. And it's going to be very sad. So I ask that you all support me so that you can send a fighter to Congress, someone who knows what they believe in their heart of hearts and does not require a piece of paper to read off of, but someone who can actually fight for you and be a weapon in the hands of the people of Western North Carolina.
Well, Madison, we certainly thank you for appearing today via Zoom and answering these questions. There were a lot more questions we could have asked, but we needed to keep this to a manageable length.
Right.
Tim's going to post it on the station's Facebook site, and folks can go view these two interviews there. And so we needed to keep it to a manageable length. I'm sure some people will say, well, why didn't you ask Ms. Bennett this question, or why didn't you ask Madison Cawthorn this question? But we had to pare it down to the essentials and to keep this interview to a manageable length. But we thank you for your time today. Tim, we thank you for hosting these sessions. Thank you to both of you. And Madison, good luck in the upcoming primary runoff, and may God bless, and God bless the United States of America. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Larry. And, as I'm sure you noted, people will be concerned about why this question wasn't asked or why this one wasn't asked. But as I've stated before, I'm more than happy to show up and answer questions anywhere, anytime with any moderator. So feel free to reach out anytime, brother.
All right. Thank you so much, Madison and Larry. I appreciate your taking the time to be a part of this interview and for doing the moderation. Very good job. I think we may have lost Larry. He may have said goodbye.
No.
Oh, you're there?
I'm here. I'm still here.
You disappeared off my screen.
We're not recording now, right?
Yes, we are. I was going to say goodbye.
Oh.
So we'll go ahead and say goodbye. And
goodbye.
All right.
Farewell, everyone.
Thanks for watching, folks.